In the heart of Seoul, where the neon lights reflect the dark underbelly of power, fear, and crime, the last person anyone would expect to see walk into the Crimson Den, a notorious mafia stronghold, was a 9-year-old black girl with a crumpled $5 bill in her hand. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to survive here. Yet, Amina walked straight toward the one man who could change everything, Jang Ho, the feared mafia boss who ruled with an iron fist. The streets outside the Crimson Den buzzed with the usual chaos, but when Amina stepped forward, everything froze. The mafia men lounging by the building, each one dangerous in their own right, paused. Whispers spread. What was she doing here? What could a child possibly want with the ruthless Jang Ho? But none of them dared to stop her. This wasn't just any child. Her eyes, wide with fear but burning with determination, spoke volumes. She had nothing but that $5 in her hand, her only possession, and the courage of someone who had already lost everything. The desperate hope in her eyes screamed louder than words. She wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here for a handout. Amina was here with a request so bold, so unimaginable, that it would change the fate of everyone involved. As Amina reached the entrance of the Crimson Den, Jang Ho appeared. A mountain of a man with tattoos marking his skin like the stories of his past, his gaze cold and calculating. His reputation had been built on fear, on bending the world to his will. But something about the little girl standing before him made him pause. She didn't speak first. She held out the crumpled $5 bill, her tiny hand trembling just slightly as she extended it toward him. "Will you save my mom?" Her voice was small, but it carried the weight of an impossible ask. And in those simple words, Jang Ho felt something shift inside him. In his world of shadows and ruthless power, where lives were taken without a second thought, this child was asking for something different. Something real. Something that demanded more than just money or violence. The mafia boss looked at the crumpled bill, then back at Amina's face. The $5 she held out wasn't just money to her. It was her last hope. It was the last thing she had, the only thing she could offer to someone powerful enough to save her mother's life. Amina's mother, Dara, was dying. Cancer had ravaged her body, and without $60,000 for an experimental treatment, she wouldn't last much longer. The hospitals wouldn't take her in. The doctors had already given up. But there was one last chance, one last hope. And that hope lay with Jang Ho, a man whose every decision was calculated, whose reputation had been built on bloodshed and fear. But Amina didn't know fear. She knew her mother needed her, and so she had come to him. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was determined to try. For a long moment, Jang Ho didn't speak. He simply stared at her, his dark eyes unreadable, his muscles tense beneath his leather vest. His world of crime, of lies, of cruelty, none of it prepared him for this. No one had ever walked into his empire with a request so raw, so pure. A child, with nothing but a prayer and the last of her money, had come to him for help. The mafia boss, the man who destroyed so many lives, was left speechless in the face of such innocence. His hand hovered near the $5 bill, but he didn't take it. Instead, he kneeled. Yes, Jang Ho, the man who controlled a world of power and fear, knelt in front of a little girl. The air around them seemed to shift, the tension thick, the world outside of the Crimson Den fading away. "What does your mother need?" he asked, his voice low and steady, but with an edge that suggested more than just curiosity. Amina, eyes wide but filled with a determination that seemed to defy her size, took a deep breath and told him everything. She spoke of her mother's illness, how she had worked 2 jobs just to keep them afloat, how she had struggled to stay alive for Amina, but now she was fading. Amina explained how her cousin Soo Hyun, a social worker, had offered to pay for the treatment, but at a cost. He would only help if Amina agreed to live with him permanently. To be given up, to be bought. That's what Soo Hyun was offering, $60,000 for her mother's treatment, in exchange for Amina's future. Amina didn't know what to do. Soo Hyun's offer wasn't kindness. It was a deal made from the darkness, from the system that used children as bargaining chips. As Amina spoke, Jang Ho's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. He knew the kind of man Soo Hyun was. He knew the system. He knew how people like him used their positions to manipulate and control. And in that moment, Jang Ho knew one thing for sure. Soo Hyun was not going to get away with it. No one would take a child's future like that. Not under his watch. Tell me his full name, Jang Ho said, his voice colder now, more determined than before. Amina, still holding her breath, gave him the name. And that was the moment everything changed. Jang Ho made his decision. He would help Amina. But this wasn't going to be just about saving her mother's life. It was going to be about something far bigger. The Mafia boss was about to take down the man who thought he could play with children's futures like pawns in a sick game. But what would happen when Jang Ho unleashed the full force of his Mafia empire to make sure Amina's family was protected? This was just the beginning. The darkness surrounding Soo Hyun was about to come crashing down. But would it be enough to change the lives of the people who mattered most? If this story hit you in the heart, don't let it go. Subscribe now, and stay with us for what's coming next. Trust me, you won't want to miss the fallout of this confrontation. And what it means for Amina, her mother, and the world that Jang Ho controls. The thick, damp air outside the Crimson Den seemed to pulse with unease. The neon lights from the nearby signs flickered against the concrete, casting sharp shadows on the alley where Sari stood. She had been walking toward this place for what felt like hours, her feet dragging with each step, but now that she was here, the weight of the moment crashed down on her. Her small, trembling hand gripped the crumpled $5 bill, her fingers pressing it as though it could somehow become more than it was. More than a symbol of desperation. She couldn't afford to lose this. This was all she had. Her mother, lying sick in their apartment with cancer, had only a few weeks left unless the treatment could be funded. But the treatment came with a cost, $60,000. And that's where her uncle, Soo Hyun, a social worker who used his position to manipulate the vulnerable, came into play. He had offered a way out. But the price? Sari's future. He had told her that she would have to live with him forever, give up her right to her mother, in exchange for the money. It was the only way to get her mother the help she needed. A wave of shame and anger hit her, but she swallowed it down. This was the only choice left. So here she was, standing before the leader of the Crimson Den, the most dangerous man in Seoul, Young Tae. He was a giant of a man, his black leather vest hugging his muscled torso, tattoos wrapping down his arms like serpents. The fear he invoked wasn't just from his reputation. It was the way he carried himself, how every man around him knew that disobeying him could lead to death. His associates watched as Sari stood there in front of him, silent, with nothing but a $5 bill clutched tightly in her hand. Some of them shifted nervously, exchanging glances. But none of them moved to stop her. They had seen people beg for mercy before, seen grown men beg him for forgiveness, but never a child. Never someone so young, so fragile, standing in the lion's den with nothing but hope. The silence between them stretched out like a rubber band pulled tight, waiting for it to snap. Then, Young Tae spoke, his voice low, but commanding. "What's this?" he asked, his eyes cold as ice, yet there was something in the way he looked at her, something that lingered just a moment too long. Sari didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. She just held the crumpled bill up higher, her eyes locking with his, unflinching. Her voice broke the silence, small and almost inaudible. "My mom, she's sick. She needs $60,000 for treatment. This is all I have left," Sari whispered, her voice breaking, but her eyes never wavering from Young Tae's. Her fingers tightened around the bill, as if she could somehow squeeze more than just a $5 note from it. Her heart was racing. She couldn't look away, couldn't move, as if she was frozen in time. She had made it this far. She couldn't back down now. She had no other choice but to stand here, before a man who could destroy her world with a single word, and ask him to help. Young Tae stood motionless, his eyes scanning her face as though trying to find the crack in her composure, the weakness in her plea. But there was nothing. She was a child, yes, but there was a resolve in her gaze that unsettled him. He had never seen a child so desperate, so fearless in the face of a world that could easily crush her. Behind him, the other men watched, tense, unsure of what was going to happen next. They had seen men beg Young Tae for their lives, but never like this. Never with the rawness that this child showed. There was something in the air, something unspoken but powerful. Young Tae felt it too. He took a step forward, his heavy boots striking the ground with a sense of finality. Sari's heart skipped. She had no idea what he was thinking. Was he about to turn her away? Was he about to crush her last hope? He reached for the $5 bill, but instead of snatching it from her hand, he paused. "Tell me why you think this will work?" he asked, his voice colder now, but still with that edge of curiosity. Sari didn't know what to say. She had no answer, not really. All she had was the raw truth, the truth that was buried deep inside her heart. Her mother was going to die, and this was her last chance to save her. "My uncle," she whispered, swallowing the lump in her throat. "He said he'd pay for the treatment, but I'd have to live with him. Forever. He said it's a trade, my life for hers." Young Tae's face hardened. The name Soo Hyun rang like an alarm in his head. He knew the type, social workers who use the system for their own gain, manipulating the vulnerable for profit. The kind of man who would prey on a little girl like Sari for his own twisted advantage. He had seen men like Soo Hyun before. They were nothing more than vultures, circling the weak. His jaw clenched as he processed her words. It wasn't the $5 that struck him. It was the idea that someone would trade a child's life for money. For treatment. For a promise. A promise that would never hold. Without saying another word, Young Tae looked down at the bill. His hand hovered over it, but instead of taking it, he placed his fingers around Sari's tiny fist. "You keep this," he said quietly, his voice soft for the first time. "You'll need it for something better than this. Ice cream, maybe. Whatever you kids buy with $5. The tenderness in his voice was so unexpected that it took Sari a moment to process it. She felt her hand shake in his, but the gesture wasn't what she had expected. He wasn't taking the money. He wasn't demanding anything from her. And yet, she felt a flicker of hope. He straightened, his eyes hardening once again as he turned to his men. "Viper," he said, his voice snapping back into its usual authority. "Get her to the safe house. No one touches her. She's under Crimson Den protection now." Sari's eyes widened. Protection? For her? A child with nothing but a $5 bill? The Mafia boss's gaze lingered on her one last time before he turned, his footsteps echoing in the alley. But just before he disappeared into the building, his voice carried back to her, cold and final. "Soo Hyun is going to regret this." "Soo Hyun, what have you done?" As Sari was taken to safety, her mind raced with the weight of what Young Tae had just promised. Would he keep his word? Would the Mafia boss truly go after someone like her uncle, someone so entrenched in the system? If this story moved you, if Sari's courage and Young Tae's unexpected compassion hit you in the heart, subscribe now. The battle for Sari's future is just beginning, and the consequences of Soo Hyun's actions will unfold in ways no one could have predicted. You don't want to miss what happens next. Inside the Crimson Den, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and secrets. The dimly lit room seemed to pulse with a darkness all its own. Walls that had seen too many deals, too many lives lost, and too much blood spilled. Sari stood in the center, still clutching the crumpled $5 bill in her hand, her small body trembling. It wasn't the cold that made her shake. It was the weight of her story, the story she had to share with the man who could either save her or destroy everything she had left. Young Tae stood opposite her, his gaze unwavering, but his posture told a different story. He was listening, carefully, calculatingly, but there was something in the way his muscles tensed, his jaw clenched, that told Sari he wasn't unaffected. The mob boss wasn't a man who showed emotion, but today, something was changing. Go ahead, he finally said, his voice low and deliberate, almost as if he was bracing himself for what was to come. His dark eyes never left her, reading her every word, every gesture. Sari took a deep breath, forcing the words out despite the lump in her throat. My mom, she's dying. Cancer. The words felt like knives cutting through her chest, but she pushed through. She had to. She had to explain it all. Young-tae needed to understand why she was here, standing before him with nothing but the $5, her last hope. Doctors say she doesn't have much time left unless she gets a treatment that costs $60,000. That's all she needs to survive. Young-tae didn't react, but his eyes darkened. He could hear the desperation in her voice, could see the weight of it on her small shoulders. And your uncle? He asked, his voice sharp. Soo-hyun. Sari's voice trembled as she said his name. It was like tasting acid on her tongue. He's a social worker. He said he'd pay for the treatment, but Sari paused, the words hanging in the air, choking her. But only if I go live with him. Forever. He wants custody of me in exchange. A life for a life. Young-tae's face remained impassive, but beneath that cold exterior, his mind was working. His fingers tightened into fists, the knuckles whitening. A life for a life. Soo-hyun wasn't just offering money. He was offering control, ownership, turning a child's future into a commodity. His gut churned with anger at the thought of what the man had done. Using the system, using the law to manipulate a child, Sari, into a bargain she couldn't possibly understand, much less consent to. Sari's voice broke the silence, her words coming faster now as the dam inside her began to break. He said I should think of it like a trade. My life for my mother's. But I don't want to leave her. I just want to help her live. I can't lose her. A painful silence stretched between them, and Young-tae couldn't tear his eyes away from her. A little girl, her heart weighed down with more than most adults could bear. Her bravery, standing here in front of him with nothing but the desperate hope of saving her mother, was something he hadn't seen in years. And for a moment, just a moment, he felt something stir inside him. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. Sympathy. The anger inside Young-tae was building. His mind was swirling with thoughts of Soo-hyun and what he had done to this child. But even more, he realized that this wasn't just about a life for a life. It was about control. Soo-hyun was the type of man who took advantage of the vulnerable. The system worked for him because he had the power to exploit it. And you little girl, Young-tae said, his voice softer now, his tone changing. You came here with just $5 to trade for your mother's life. He walked closer to her, his presence still imposing, but for the first time, he didn't feel the usual indifference. He saw it, her courage, her pure desperation. This was why she was here. This was why she would walk into the den of a dangerous man like him, hoping to find mercy in a place where mercy was rare. Sari nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. Her grip on the $5 bill was the only thing that kept her grounded. This is all I have, she said softly. Please. Can you help me? Young-tae stared at her for a long time, as if he were trying to read the words written in her heart. In that moment, the Mafia boss, who had lived his entire life in the shadows, controlling, taking, demanding, saw something different. He saw the rawness of Sari's plea, the pure need that a child shouldn't have to carry. And it did something to him, something he couldn't shake. I'll help, he said suddenly, surprising both himself and her. Young-tae's words hit her like a wave. He was offering help. Was it real? Was it a trick? Sari couldn't be sure. But right now, this was the only chance she had. But as soon as the words left his lips, Young-tae's face hardened again. But there's a cost, he continued, his voice low, a warning tone in his words. You don't get something for nothing, little girl. Nothing in this world is free. The price of hope is steep. Sari's heart sank as she heard him. She had known there would be a price, but what would it be? Young-tae's eyes were fixed on Sari, his gaze calculating, weighing her, sizing her up. She could feel the coldness returning, but now, there was something else, something darker. Was this really a chance? Or was she just another pawn in his game? What price would she have to pay for saving her mother's life? The clock was ticking for Sari and her mother, and now she had to face a mafia boss whose world was built on power and payment. Would he truly protect them, or would he demand something in return that could cost her more than she was willing to pay? If this story tugged at your heart, if you're on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now and stay with us. The price of hope is high, but for Sari it might be higher than anyone could imagine. Will she pay the price? The Crimson Den's war room was a place where deals were struck, plans were laid, and consequences were decided. It smelled of smoke and secrets, the walls lined with maps and screens, each showing a piece of the empire Young Tae had built over the years. Tonight, it was quieter than usual, no chatter, no hustle and bustle of the mafia's inner workings. Tonight, it was just him, his most trusted lieutenants, and a girl's desperate plea for help that had set the gears of something much darker into motion. Sari's words echoed in his mind. A life for a life. The price her uncle was asking wasn't just money. It was her future, her childhood. It was everything. Young Tae leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he looked at the digital map on the screen in front of him. His thoughts were consumed by the name Soo Hyun. He had known Soo Hyun was dangerous, but not like this. He hadn't known the full extent of the man's reach, the power he wielded within the system. He'd used the law, the very system that was supposed to protect people, to prey on those who were too weak to fight back. Soo Hyun's been in this game longer than we thought, Young Tae muttered under his breath. He glanced up at his right-hand man, Viper, who had been silently observing the situation unfold. The room had grown colder as Young Tae processed everything. The mafia boss's cold eyes flicked over to the intel that Viper had compiled on Soo Hyun. The truth was more unsettling than he had imagined. This isn't just about money, Young Tae said, his voice low but laced with growing fury. This is about control. Soo Hyun's been orchestrating a twisted trade, using children to manipulate the system for his own gain. Viper leaned forward, his expression grim as he studied the files. The evidence was undeniable. For years, Soo Hyun had been exploiting vulnerable families, using his position as a social worker to arrange custody transfers for children in exchange for money, bribing authorities and manipulating the system to hide his tracks. Every deal, every child he rescued, was a transaction, no different from a business deal. It was all part of Soo Hyun's dark agenda to build his own little empire, one child at a time. This man is a predator, Young Tae continued, his words hardening with every passing second. He doesn't just prey on the weak, he uses them. He's using the system itself to turn children into pawns. Soo Hyun's name had come up in several of the syndicate's investigations before, but nothing had ever been solid enough to take action. He had always remained just under the radar, slipping through the cracks of the law. But now, Young Tae understood the true nature of the threat. What's his endgame? Young Tae asked, his voice ice-cold. Why Sari? Why this girl? Viper paused, his jaw tightening as he processed the implications. He wants her to disappear, just like the others.
À permanente solution.
But he's not just doing this for the money. It's about control, as you said. He thinks he can trade her for $60,000, make her disappear, and no one will ever know. The realization hit Young Tae like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just about the money Soo Hyun wanted. It was about using a child's life as a bargaining chip, a way to solidify his hold on the system. He could use Sari to create a permanent deal, one that would tie up loose ends and ensure his twisted empire continued to grow without interference. He's been using these children as leverage for years, Young Tae murmured, the words turning darker in his mind. He clenched his fists, the anger boiling beneath the surface. And now he's trying to do it again. But this time, it's different. Viper didn't need to ask what Young Tae meant. He knew exactly what was coming. We're going to stop him, Young Tae said firmly, his voice now filled with resolve. We're going to make sure Soo Hyun never manipulates another family again. And we'll make sure Sari and her mother get the treatment they deserve. The war room grew still, the weight of the decision settling into the air. The plan was set. Young-tae would not allow anyone to prey on the weak, not on his watch. And Sorry, the little girl who had come to him with nothing but hope, would be protected at all costs. But even as Young-tae made his decision, a sense of unease settled in his chest. He knew what was coming next. He knew the dangers of crossing someone like Soo-hyun, who had his fingers in every part of the system. But Young-tae wasn't someone who backed down. The stakes were high now, and there was no turning back. The trap was set. The Mafia's wrath was about to come down on Soo-hyun, but there was one thing left to do. Soo-hyun had to be found. And once he was, what would happen to him? What would Young-tae do to make sure he paid for everything he'd done? But Soo-hyun wasn't going to go down quietly. He had connections. He had power. And even with the Crimson Den behind him, Young-tae knew it was never going to be that simple. If you're on the edge of your seat, wondering what happens next, subscribe now to see how the Mafia boss's world is about to collide with Soo-hyun's twisted game. This fight is just getting started, and the stakes have never been higher. Don't miss it. Inside Young-tae's office, the air was thick with tension. The soft glow of a single desk lamp illuminated the room, casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. Young-tae sat behind his large, polished desk, his fingers steepled in front of him, his mind a million miles away. His usual cold, calculating demeanor had slipped, replaced by a storm of emotions he wasn't used to feeling. This wasn't the Mafia world he knew. It wasn't about territory or money or survival. It was about something deeper, something that hadn't been a part of his life for years. He had been a ruthless boss for so long, never questioning his actions, never second-guessing the brutal decisions he made. But now, Sorry, the 9-year-old girl with nothing but a crumpled $5 bill in her hand, had changed all of that. Her courage had done something to him, something he couldn't ignore. Young-tae had spent his entire life in the shadows, manipulating the world to his advantage. But for the first time, he saw the world from a different perspective. He saw the helplessness of a child, the desperation in her eyes, and the love she had for her dying mother. In that moment, Young-tae felt the weight of his own choices pressing down on him. He had always fought for power. He had always played by the rules of the Mafia. But this wasn't about power. This wasn't about survival. This was about doing what was right. Young-tae's mind raced as he thought about what Sorry had told him. Her uncle, Soo-hyun, a man he'd known as a social worker, a man who was supposed to help people, was nothing but a predator. The more Young-tae thought about it, the more disgusted he became. Soo-hyun had used his position to manipulate families, turning children into commodities in his twisted game. He had traded Sorry's future for money, offering her up in exchange for a medical treatment her mother needed to survive. But Sorry was no commodity. Sorry was a child. And a child should never have to make a choice like that. Young-tae stood up from his desk, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced across the room, his thoughts swirling. The decision was clear, but the cost weighed heavily on his shoulders. If he was going to help Sorry, he would have to expose Soo-hyun for what he truly was. And that would not come without consequences. He would need to use every resource in his Mafia empire, every ounce of his power, to protect Sorry and her mother. He would ensure that her mother got the treatment she needed, no matter what it took. But it wasn't just about the treatment. It was about making sure Soo-hyun never hurt another family again. And for that, he would have to bring the full weight of the Crimson Den down on him. Young-tae's decision was made. He would help Sorry. He would protect her. And he would tear Soo-hyun's world apart. But as Young-tae turned back to his desk, the weight of his decision hit him harder than before. Helping Sorry was one thing. Exposing Soo-hyun was another. And once he made that move, there would be no going back. The Mafia's dark world would never be the same. Young-tae was about to make a move that would change everything. Soo-hyun had no idea what was coming for him. And Sorry, the innocent little girl who had walked into the Crimson Den with nothing but $5 and a prayer, was about to find out what it truly meant to be protected by the Mafia. But what would Soo-hyun do when he realized Young-tae had come for him? Would he crumble under the pressure, or would he fight back with everything he had? The stakes have never been higher. Young Tae is no longer just a mafia boss. He's a protector, a man who will stop at nothing to make things right. But as the world of crime collides with a family's desperate fight for survival, what will happen when the cost of doing the right thing becomes too much to bear? If you're feeling the tension, if you're invested in what happens next, subscribe now to see how Sari's fate unfolds and watch as Young Tae dives headfirst into a battle that will shake the foundations of his empire. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. The Crimson Den was alive with whispers, the usual hum of activity subdued as Young Tae made his decision. The Mafia's headquarters, a place where power was a language spoken fluently by every associate, felt different now. The cold, oppressive air in the war room grew thicker with every passing second, as the decision that would change everything began to take shape. Young Tae stood at the head of the large conference table, his gaze focused on the file in front of him. Soo Hyun's dark dealings laid bare. The room was filled with his lieutenants, each one of them waiting for the boss's next move. The walls, lined with old maps of Seoul and the city's underworld, seemed to echo with the weight of what Young Tae was about to do. Viper. Young Tae's voice broke the silence, sharp and commanding. I want everything on Soo Hyun. Track his every move. I need you to gather the evidence of his crimes, everything he's done. I want him exposed. No more hiding behind the system. Viper, Young Tae's most trusted enforcer, was already halfway out the door before the words had fully left his mouth. He understood the gravity of what was being asked of him. He had seen the boss take down enemies before, but this was different. Young Tae wasn't just going after a rival. He was going after a man who had used the very system he controlled to exploit the weak and vulnerable. You got it, boss, Viper said, his voice low but filled with determination. He knew what was at stake. The Crimson Den wasn't just a mafia organization. It was a force that could bring down anyone who dared to cross them. And right now, that was exactly what they were going to do. With a nod, Young Tae turned his attention to the other men in the room, their expressions mixed with uncertainty. They had all watched him rise to power by staying cold, calculating, and ruthless. They had seen him bring enemies to their knees without a second thought.
But now?
They were seeing a different side of him, a side that wasn't just about power. A side that was about something much deeper, justice. The girl? Young Tae continued, his voice softer now but still carrying authority. Sorry, she's to be protected. I want her taken to the safe house. Mrs. Chin will take care of her. Make sure she's comfortable and no one touches her. She's under Crimson Den protection now. Asterisk. The men exchanged glances. They had heard stories of Young Tae's temper, of his merciless reputation, but this was different. A child, Sari, was now under his protection, and the world of crime was suddenly looking a little less black and white. The men had all expected more violence, more power plays. But this? Protecting a child? It wasn't the move of a ruthless gangster. It was the move of a man who was starting to question what it meant to truly have power. Young Tae could feel the weight of their gaze on him, could sense the confusion in the room. But he didn't care. He wasn't here to explain himself. He was here to make sure Sari and her mother got what they needed. And if that meant tearing down Soo Hyun and anyone who got in his way, he would do it. As Viper left to carry out his orders, Young Tae stayed behind, his fingers pressing against the cold wood of the table.
He knew the stakes.
He knew the cost of helping Sari would come with consequences. But something inside him told him it was the right thing to do. This was no longer about territory or money. It was about protecting the innocent in a world that rarely offered such protection. The room was silent. The decision had been made. Young Tae was about to turn his empire into a force for justice, a force that would hunt down those who used their power to destroy the helpless. But as the plan to bring down Soo Hyun began to unfold, one question lingered. How far was Young Tae willing to go to protect the innocent? Soo Hyun had no idea what was coming for him. The mafia boss wasn't just coming for his empire, he was coming for him. But would Young Tae's plan work? Could the mighty Crimson Den bring down a man who had used the system to exploit the weak for so long? And if Soo Hyun fought back, What would Young Tae do? If this story has grabbed you by the heart, if you feel the weight of Young Tae's decision and the uncertainty of what's to come, subscribe now. The fight for justice is just beginning. The Crimson Den is no longer just a criminal empire. It's a force for something bigger, something more dangerous. And the fallout from this decision will shake the city to its core. The hum of machines and the glow of computer screens filled the underground operations room deep within the Crimson Denver. This was where the real work of the Mafia happened, where the power of the Crimson Den network pulsed through every fiber of the city, unseen by the outside world. The room was bathed in a dim, flickering light as Young Tae and his trusted lieutenants worked swiftly to uncover the full extent of Soo Hyun's manipulation. The stakes had never been higher. Young Tae stood in front of a large monitor, his face illuminated by the screens. His lieutenants, Viper, Numbers, and Razor, moved with a quiet intensity around the room, their eyes fixed on the data streaming in. Soo Hyun's life was being dissected, one thread at a time. What had seemed like a simple case of exploitation was quickly unfolding into something much darker. And the deeper they dug, the more they realized that Soo Hyun wasn't working alone. "We've got a hit," Numbers said, her voice sharp as she scrolled through a series of files. "A $20,000 transfer, linked to a shell company. Looks like Soo Hyun's been covering his tracks by using a complex network of accounts. It's all hidden under layers of fake charities and corporate donations." Young Tae leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "I want it all. Everything." The screen flickered again, and Razor pulled up more information. "These aren't just regular shell companies," he said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "Some of these names are tied to high-profile families in the city, real estate moguls, tech billionaires, and government officials." The realization hit like a freight train. Soo Hyun wasn't just a predator working alone. He had connections. Powerful people in his corner, all feeding off the exploitation of vulnerable families. Young Tae felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about a child being manipulated. This was about a network of corruption that had been allowed to thrive under the radar for too long. Viper stepped forward, his expression cold. "If he's got people like this backing him, this won't be easy. We're not just taking down a social worker. We're taking down a system." Young Tae's jaw tightened as he processed the information. He had been prepared to take on Soo Hyun alone, but now he realized the fight would be much bigger than he had anticipated. His plan to expose Soo Hyun was about to hit a wall. These allies, these powerful, untouchable people, would do everything they could to protect him. "We have to move fast," Young Tae ordered, his voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. "We'll use the same tactics Soo Hyun used against the system, his network of connections. We'll tear down every bridge he's built, expose every secret he's been hiding." The tension in the room grew as they all understood what that meant. Soo Hyun had carefully constructed his empire, but now it was time to break it down, piece by piece. But even as Young Tae made his plan, a dark thought lingered in the back of his mind. How far would Soo Hyun go to protect himself? Would he resort to the same ruthless tactics that had made him so dangerous in the first place? And if he did, what would Young Tae have to sacrifice to bring him down? The Mafia was mobilizing. Young Tae had made his move. He was going after Soo Hyun, and nothing would stop him. But the deeper they dug into Soo Hyun's past, the more dangerous this fight became. Powerful figures were involved, and Young Tae wasn't sure how far the reach of Soo Hyun's allies went. Would Young Tae be able to expose the full extent of the corruption before it was too late? And if Soo Hyun fought back, what would be the price to pay? Every minute that passed brought them closer to a war that would shake the foundations of the Mafia and the system itself. But would they be ready for the storm that was coming? If this story pulled you in, if you feel the tension building, subscribe now. The hunt is on, and the stakes have never been higher. Soo Hyun won't go down without a fight, and neither will Young Tae. But when two empires collide, the fallout is inevitable. You don't want to miss what happens next. Stay with us as the war for justice begins. The parking garage was empty, save for the echoes of Soo Hyun's footsteps as he walked toward his car. The faint hum of distant city traffic outside did nothing to drown out the tense silence that hung in the air. Young Tae and Viper stood in the shadows, their eyes fixed on Soo Hyun, who had no idea what was coming for him. Young Tae watched Soo Hyun with cold, calculating eyes, his mind processing everything. The man standing before him. The man who had used his position as a social worker to manipulate children and families for his own gain, was now caught in the web of his own making. Soo Hyun was about to face the consequences of his actions. And there was no escaping them. You thought you could control everything, didn't you? Young Tae's voice broke the silence, sharp and cutting through the air like a blade. Soo Hyun froze, his back still turned to them as he reached for his car keys. I don't know what you're talking about, Soo Hyun said, his voice steady, but it lacked conviction. He could feel the weight of the moment settling in his chest, but he refused to show weakness. He had always been the one in control, always played the system to his advantage. He wasn't about to let Young Tae intimidate him. Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about, Young Tae said, stepping out of the shadows. His towering figure loomed over Soo Hyun as he took a step forward. The children. The families. The system you've been using to manipulate and control. You've been playing a game with lives, Soo Hyun. Soo Hyun turned slowly, a slight smirk on his face, as if trying to maintain the upper hand. I'm a social worker. I help people. I'm just doing my job. Your job. Young Tae scoffed, his voice laced with disgust. You've been selling children, manipulating the system for your own gain. Your job is nothing more than a facade. You've built your empire on the backs of people like Sari, like her mother, and now you're going to pay for it. Soo Hyun's eyes flickered with panic. His usual calm demeanor was cracking. He tried to stand his ground, but he could feel the walls closing in. Young Tae was right. His entire operation was on the brink of collapse. I don't know what you think you've found, but I've done nothing wrong. Everything I did was legal. Soo Hyun's voice was growing more desperate now, but he tried to keep his composure. I followed the law. The law. Young Tae's voice dropped, his tone icy. You think your twisted deals are legal? Your little trade of children for money? That's not the law. That's exploitation. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you've done. Soo Hyun took a step back, his hand brushing the door handle of his car. You're bluffing, he said, though the words came out weaker than he intended. You can't prove anything. I don't need to bluff, Young Tae said, his voice now filled with cold certainty. I have everything on you. The bank transfers, the bribes, the records of your so-called legitimate transactions. I've got it all. And now, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of man you really are. Viper stepped forward, his massive figure blocking Soo Hyun's escape. Soo Hyun's eyes darted toward the exit, but he knew there was no way out. He was cornered. Young Tae's men had been tracking him for days, gathering every piece of evidence they could find. It was only a matter of time before the walls closed in completely. What? What do you want from me? Soo Hyun finally asked, his voice trembling as the reality of his situation sank in. His smug confidence was gone, replaced by fear. He had been so sure of his power, so confident that his connections would protect him. But now, he was facing the one person he could not manipulate. I want you to disappear, Young Tae said, his eyes narrowing. I want you to leave this city, never to come back. And if you don't, I'll make sure every last bit of your dirty business is exposed. Your career, your freedom, everything you've worked for gone. Soo Hyun looked at Young Tae, his face pale, his mind racing. This was no longer a game. This was the end. Young Tae wasn't bluffing. He was going to destroy him. I'll comply, Soo Hyun said, his voice barely above a whisper. But you have to understand, I did it for them. For the families. For the children. The children? Young Tae repeated, his tone dark and sharp. You didn't do this for the children. You did this for yourself. And now you're going to pay. Soo Hyun stepped back again, but this time, his legs were shaking. He knew the end had come. There was no escaping Young Tae's reach now. The walls were closing in, and everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was about to come crashing down. As Soo Hyun's world crumbled around him, he realized there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. Young Tae had taken everything from him, his freedom, his reputation, his empire. And now, as the storm of justice closed in, what would become of the man who had manipulated the system for so long? Would Soo Hyun disappear quietly, or would he fight back with everything he had left? The clock was ticking, and Young Tae had no intention of letting him slip away again. But with powerful enemies still lurking in the shadows, could Young Tae finish what he had started, or was this just the beginning of a much bigger battle? If you feel the heat of the tension, if you're invested in what happens next, subscribe now and stay with us as the fight for justice intensifies. The Mafia is coming for Soo Hyun, and the fallout from his betrayal will echo through the streets of Seoul. The sterile walls of the hospital room seemed to hum with quiet energy as Sari stood at the door, gazing at her mother, Dara, lying in the bed. The soft beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound, steady and calm, as the bright fluorescent lights bathed the room in an unnatural glow. Dara was hooked up to machines, receiving the experimental treatment that Young Tae had made possible. The $60,000, a sum that had once seemed impossible, had been paid. And now, her mother was here, fighting for her life in a way she had never thought possible. It wasn't just the treatment that made this possible, it was the intervention of a man who, in every way, should have been her enemy. The Mafia boss, the man who ruled the shadows, had made this moment happen. But as Sari stood there, holding the crumpled $5 bill in her hand, she couldn't help but think of how far she had come. She had entered the Crimson Den with nothing but that small piece of money, a desperate hope, and the courage of a child who had nothing left to lose. Now, her mother was alive, her future was alive. And all of it had come at a price. It wasn't just money. It was the price of trust, the price of protection. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes never leaving her mother's peaceful face. Dara's hair was thin from the treatments, and her skin was pale, but she was breathing. She was still here. The doctors had said this treatment could work, but Sari had seen the fear in their eyes when they spoke about it. There were no guarantees. But Sari didn't care about guarantees anymore. She had already given up hope too many times, and now, for the first time in weeks, she could see something different. A chance. A chance to keep her mother, to keep her family whole. The $5 bill was still in Sari's hand. The same bill she had offered Young Tae when she first came to him. It was all she had to give, and in that moment, it had felt like the only thing that mattered. Now it felt like a symbol of something more. I can't believe it, Sari whispered to herself as she looked at her mother, her voice barely a breath. You're really going to make it? Her voice cracked, and her hands shook as she gripped the crumpled bill, pressing it tightly to her chest. Just then, a knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, and there he was.
Young Tae.
His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time, she didn't see the cold, ruthless gangster. She saw a man who had chosen to protect them, to make sure her mother had a chance to survive. How is she? Young Tae asked, his voice softer than usual. There was a gentleness in his tone that caught Sari off guard. He wasn't here as the Mafia boss. He was here as the man who had kept his promise. She's doing better, Sari said, her voice thick with emotion. She wanted to say more, but the words stuck in her throat. For a moment, the two of them just stood there in silence. Young Tae didn't speak, but the look in his eyes told Sari everything she needed to know. He wasn't here for anything else. He was here because he had made a decision to protect the innocent, even when the world around him was full of shadows. You did this, Sari said, her voice cracking as she looked at him. You saved her. You saved us. Young Tae didn't say anything right away. Instead, he took a step forward, glancing at Dara as she lay there, the machines working to give her life. His jaw tightened slightly, and for a moment, Sari saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a mix of determination and something else, maybe even regret? But it was gone before she could catch it. You're welcome, he said finally, his voice firm. But then, He softened just enough for Sari to catch it. But it's not over. There's still a long way to go. What do you mean? Sari asked, confused. There are people who won't let this go, Young-tae replied, his expression hardening. Your uncle's not the only one pulling strings. You'll need to stay protected. The moment Soo-hyun is exposed, things will get messy. I'll make sure you're safe. But this fight is far from over. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Sari felt a shiver run down her spine, not from fear, but from the weight of the truth. This wasn't over. Not yet. There was still the battle ahead. The fight for justice hadn't even started. But for now, she had a moment. A moment with her mother, a moment of peace before the storm. Sari held the $5 bill tightly in her hand, a token of everything that had led her here, the journey from desperation to hope. It had cost more than she could have ever imagined, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right side of something. Young-tae was right. The battle wasn't over. But what would happen when the truth about Soo-hyun came to light? Would Young-tae be able to protect Sari and her mother from the storm that was coming? And what about the powerful figures who had backed Soo-hyun? The web of corruption ran deep, and the stakes were about to get higher. If you felt the weight of this story, Sari's journey, Young-tae's unexpected transformation, then subscribe now. This is just the beginning. The fight for justice is about to get real, and the decisions made today will change everything. Don't miss what happens next. The storm is coming, and Young-tae's world is about to collide with forces that could tear everything apart. The Crimson Den was eerily silent as Young-tae sat at the head of the massive black lacquered table, the weight of the decisions he had made pressing heavily on his shoulders. The room, once filled with the hum of crime and the cold calculations of his mafia empire, now seemed quieter, almost reflective. The $5 bill, which had been the starting point of everything, now rested in a simple frame on his desk. A symbol of everything that had changed, of everything he had come to believe in. Young-tae hadn't expected that one small act of kindness, helping a little girl with nothing but a crumpled $5, would redefine his world. But it had, and he could feel the change in the air in himself. Behind him, the usual mafia associates lingered in the shadows, the tension of the previous days still palpable. Their leader had done something unthinkable, something that no one, not even his most loyal enforcers, had ever expected. He had shifted the entire purpose of the Crimson Den, and now they were forced to follow the new code. Soo-hyun's been dealt with, Viper said, his voice cutting through the quiet room. His career is finished. His connection's gone. We made sure he's disappeared. No one will find him. Young-tae didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the frame, where the $5 bill rested, now a symbol of justice. He remembered the fear in Sari's eyes, the desperation of a child who had nowhere else to go. He remembered the moment when he had made the decision to protect her and her mother. He had made a promise, and he had kept it. But what he hadn't expected was how that promise would change him, change everything about Crimson Den. She's gone now, Viper continued, the lack of emotion in his voice showing the work they'd done was simply business as usual. But Young-tae was no longer the same man who had once ruled with an iron fist. No, his world was shifting just like his organization was shifting. Sari and her mother are free, Young-tae said, his voice soft but resolute. They're starting over. They're safe. He paused, the weight of his words settling in the room. But we're not just making deals anymore. We're protecting people. We hunt the monsters now. There was a collective silence. The men in the room had always been loyal, but loyalty had always been to Young-tae's power. They followed him because he made things happen, because he commanded respect with fear. But this was different. Young-tae was speaking in a way they hadn't heard before. It was as if the purpose of their organization had completely changed overnight. The world doesn't work like that. One of the lieutenants spoke up, his voice hesitant. You can't just protect the innocent and expect to keep running a business. The mafia is built on survival, not charity. Young-tae turned to face him, his eyes locking with the lieutenant's. The room went still, the air thick with tension. For a moment, Jung Tae was the powerful mafia boss they all knew, the one who had no patience for weakness. But then his gaze softened, and he spoke again, this time with a new weight to his words. The world is what we make of it. There was an undeniable shift in the air, a moment of clarity that felt like it belonged to a man who had finally come into his own. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was about redemption, about doing the right thing for once, even if it meant going against everything that had defined his empire for years. And as he looked out across the room, seeing the men who had been by his side through thick and thin, he knew that they were all at a crossroads. They could either follow him into this new world, or they could walk away. But either way, Jung Tae would never be the same. This is the new code, Jung Tae said firmly, his voice carrying the authority that was now laced with a new sense of purpose. We protect the innocent. We hunt the monsters who prey on them. From now on, that's what we do. If you're in for this. If not, you can leave. The room was silent. And then, one by one, the lieutenants nodded. They understood. They were loyal to Jung Tae, but more than that, they respected the man he was becoming. They knew that whatever came next, it was going to be something different. Jung Tae turned back to the framed $5 bill. It was just a small piece of paper, but it had come to mean so much more. It represented Sari's courage, her mother's survival, and the shift in his own heart. It was the foundation of something new. The weight of the decision was no longer just on his shoulders. It was on all of theirs. The Mafia's future would be different. And for the first time, Jung Tae could say that with confidence. The decision had been made. Jung Tae had transformed, not just in his heart, but in the very core of Crimson Denver. No longer was it about power, fear, and control. Now it was about protecting the vulnerable, protecting the ones who couldn't protect themselves. But Soo Hyun's empire wasn't the only one that could fall. The deeper they went into this fight, the more they would find. And there would be enemies, powerful enemies, who wouldn't just let this new code slide. Jung Tae had opened a door. But would he be able to shut it before the storm of retaliation came crashing in? If Sari's story moved you, if you felt the weight of Jung Tae's decision and the rise of a new code of honor, subscribe now. The hunt for justice isn't over yet. Soo Hyun's downfall is just the beginning, and Jung Tae's journey toward redemption is about to take even darker turns.